is there anything that you guys want to touch on specifically that we've covered in the past? So one of the main things that we're going to go over is actually block control. So we're just going to go over blocks a little bit more. I know we've been doing blocks over the past couple of days, but it is still actually really important to understand how to use them and how importing them into other drawings works, as well as how that's a little bit different from how we brought in that one photo. If you remember, there was that little vase photo we brought in. It's an external reference. How that's a little bit different than bringing in a true block. We'll also cover some coordinate systems again. Just because so far we've been actually drawing using something called polar coordinates. So everything's been relative to one another. If you ever need to, there's actually a way to enter absolute coordinates as well. This is if you have something laid out based off position on your drawing area, and not so much how we've been loosely just drawing sort of everywhere as needed. So it is a little bit different, and I'll go over that as well. Okay, so first things first, let's cover blocks. If you guys want to go and open up the drawing called Gripper Assembly underscore new. I'm just going to add this for the online group here right away. So sometimes you're actually going to be given a drawing, something like this, where everything is essentially exploded. These are all separate lines. So what the strength of having blocks would be is if you were to having to adjust something, such as the extension of this arm here or the angle of this piece. If you've laid out your blocks well, you can actually use AutoCAD to see limits and collisions with other objects within your model. So what we're going to practice today is just going through that and remembering to use the tools that we have at our disposal to make this a little bit easier. So I'll let everyone get their AutoCAD fired up and find this file. Again, you're going to want to save this to a different location, just so that as you're modifying things, you can keep it saved. Save it on your desktop or your own private folder. So the key difference that you guys all have to remember is that there's essentially two types of blocks. There's the internal blocks that you're creating that are only seen within this one file. That's one where if you type in just the command block, B-L-O-C-K, or even just B for the shortcut on the keyboard, this is where you can define a single block definition internally. The other option is doing a W block, so WB. This is a write block. It's also creating a block, but it's actually going to write a new file. This is actually good for creating other blocks, but also for situations such as manufacturing or having to essentially break apart one drawing into multiples. Even though it's called a block, you're essentially just creating a new drawing altogether. So doing a write block lets you create perhaps this section right here to become its own unique piece. And from there, instead of maybe making multiple viewports, you would actually make one viewport on a different file altogether and do the drawing there, right? Because last time we had everything in our, let me just bring it back up here, on our little genset drawing. Where did it go? That's the building. So in this situation where we had everything in one model space, we broke out things as needed, right, into different views by creating multiple viewports. And that's one acceptable way of doing it. The other way to do it could have been me selecting perhaps this base here, creating a write block, writing this to a new file. So skid base, choose my base point. All the right objects were already selected. I'll just keep that in inches and say OK. I've now created a brand new file. And the only thing in here is my skid base. So with that, I don't have to worry about trying to hide layers, or in my viewport I don't have to try to play around with the zoom and try to hide the things that are also in the model space. This is my only object. So if I want to quickly isolate it, that's it, it's done. There's not much else I need to do. I can go ahead, start my dimensioning and annotations. So that's the benefit of being able to write a new file altogether instead of having multiple views all within the same model space, having to find that the right view, the right object. Splitting it apart into multiple drawing packages is also a way of doing it. So there's no right or wrong way. It comes down to what's easier and what's acceptable within your company standards. So with that, if you guys want to open up this drawing package here, what I want you guys to do is think about each section of this arm and the other arm as individual objects, so individual blocks. So if you were to think about what needs to be put into its own separate block to have individual control, that's sort of what I want you to be selecting. So for example, if I go ahead and look at this component right here, I can go ahead and start picking each section that belongs to that object. So, I can create my block internally if I want. Call this a cylinder. Let's just call this base point right here. And we'll leave it at that. Now, in case you haven't selected everything, just because you've already gone into this command does not mean that you cannot add anything additional. So if you click right here to go back into select objects, you can actually go ahead and add back whatever objects you were missing. But just be aware, when you do that, it does lose all your past selections, so you have to add everything back in. now that can be moved around and you won't be concerned about leaving anything behind. Now if you forget something like that, something that's missing, so I can ref edit this, and up here in the top right hand corner you can add additional things that might have been left behind after the fact. So each line I want to add to this working set, I just click up here, I click the line first and then click up here, add to working set. After you're happy with everything, you can type ref close, save the options. Oh, still didn't get it. Okay. Try that again. Oops. There we go. And then you also notice how the color changes when I click that. It went from that sort of light, a little bit opaque kind of color to a nice solid bright color. That means it's now part of this block. Alright, so pick everything. That. And then what's nice is once you have something like this already all blocked together, you can see the rotations that it has available. So let's say you were trying to figure out if two objects were going to collide within a specific rotation, using the references you have. So this is going to be my pivot point, obviously. If you use the command rotate, and you visually spin your object on AutoCAD, you can quite visibly see if there's ever going to be contact in here. Now this is just free range of motion. I believe we've covered this, but just in case we need to have this reviewed again, within rotate you have a couple other options. You have copy, you also have reference. If you type the letter R, it'll ask you for a reference angle. So let's say I want my reference angle, which is the line of action right here. I'm now directly in line with my arm. So spend a little bit of time here, start going through, start breaking apart this model as you feel is necessary. Now you can take this one step further. Let's say I want to explode this, and I want to actually have this section here be one part of the cylinder. So I'm going to block this again. I'm going to call this cylinder body. And then we'll call this part, and we'll include this, I guess, cylinder shaft. Too much stuff.
个什么东西？是一个气缸，这个气缸跟 Purge， 选择这个原点 ，OK， 它就选择物体，选择物体什么选？刚才你想在这个选择一个一个选择上，很慢对不对？那我怎么选最快的呢？是零五，按 Tab， 去掉，好像不要的东西去掉它，这个不要了，选完了，看这个，OK， 比较快就做它。
我刚才就是符号和对吧？然后这一块不应该是符号，所以应该是 R 是吧？
对，你现在在建块的时候，
那如果现在呢，我这块已经建好了，这块已经建好了，然后我发现我多不要更速度，我有办法。下一课我们讲到一个什么working active working set。就是说什么 ref edit 然后 ref close， 对，不这样有办法吗？有办法是吗？
Oh yeah, in case you guys ever need to clean up things that you have added by accident in AutoCAD, or let's say you're done modeling and everything, you've made all these extra layers that you no longer need and you want to clean up your file, there's a command called Purge. So if you type in PU, so within here are multiple different things that you can actually clean away. Okay, so this will bring up your full list of everything that's within your AutoCAD drawing. So in the past, when storage room was a little bit more concerning and you needed to actually save room, you can actually go in here, purge away some of your layers, and your file size will actually grow a little bit smaller. So nowadays, that's not as big of a concern, but it's still not bad to clean up your files because it also helps your drawing load a little bit better. And if you have a massive model that maybe you made lots of extra blocks and multiple different layers that are no longer in use, this is a good way to clean them up. Now, there's also things you cannot delete. There's going to be reasons why there's certain things that cannot be deleted because perhaps they're the only style. For example, like this is the basic standard style of multi-leader styles. This cannot be purged. So this is an option to see. And then up here, view items you can purge. These are all things that, even though they're used in your drawing, can be cleaned away.
OK 的话，它如果你要选择物体，对不对？Select Object。好了，我选到这里来了，发现你的东西多了。 选 A， 我就在那里看一下可不可以。那块你经常用？没有。明白了？另外WB 我先
这个指的是哪天？我是那个
对。
So is that clear, the two different block styles and how those work? One being just a block internally, and then the other one being a right block, which is the full external file. Once you brought in an external file though, so even though you've done a W block command, written in another file, it also exists in your current project once you've brought that in. So it can be both at the same time. So that's when you have to be really careful about understanding how those two are different things. Because when you make an edit in your right block, because it is a separate block, it does not necessarily update the internal definition of that block. Unless you're to re-import that. Is the way AutoCAD works, it doesn't quite have that level of linking. So if you want to be keeping everything internally until probably the last step, so to speak, if you have multiple different models and do all your edits, and at the very end, if you have to save them away, it's probably the safest method instead of breaking it apart and always re-importing them back in. And just in case it wasn't covered clearly enough, when you're doing your object selection, so as you can see, I'm doing a bottom right hand click and then doing the green drag. That means anything this is touching, it'll select. Well, because this is a block already, and I pick that line there, it's selected all of this as well. If you hold down Shift and you left click something, it takes it away from your selection. was everyone okay on Saturday? No tickets? Everyone had their car there when they went back? So I don't know if anyone noticed that, but I accidentally deleted or took away the circle reference. Luckily, I've got the other one here, but what you're able to do with blocks is you can copy over whatever you're working on. We're trying to re-reference. Drop it back in with the right reference points. Go into your ref edit. And this is where you can play around with your adding and removal of working sets. So that's not the right circle I want. I want the internal one. Add it in. Save away. I can delete the part that I don't want anymore. Just like that. So the biggest strength of this is this allows you to make AutoCAD react as if it was in real life, right? If you actually had this object you're trying to manipulate, you want to block things in a very common sense type of way, or a logical kind of way, so that whatever you're actually trying to manipulate in real life, could also be manipulated that way. So think of a block as that, or exactly that. It's something that you would in real life be able to say this is one component by itself. So as you see here, I've made a pad, a cylinder body, and the cylinder shaft all by itself. So what I could do here is, let's say this was a fully closed cylinder now, fully retracted. That part. You can use AutoCAD to see what the limits are of it being retracted, extended, see if there's going to be collisions when certain components are in their different positions. And then think about how this also works using the reference points that you already have there. In this case, because it's something revolving, feel free to use all those reference points to see other points of collision. This is getting more into manipulating the data to work on layout work. So in this case, it's mechanical movement. But if you start imagining this to be perhaps an overhead view of something that's swinging around, and this was a top-down view of a huge area, using AutoCAD in that sense, this is now applicable to civil. Or if you're doing your process layouts in a large plant and you have something moving within there, again, same idea. And this is in my retracted position, so if I were to extend this out, like so, you have your new reference points. So if I were to detail this slightly, go to my Annotate tab and get myself a diameter. Well, it's a ugly color, but why is that staying yellow? So this is getting into that sort of strength of AutoCAD, and just because we only have the one block showing doesn't mean now that I've created that block I can't have multiple to see various positions. So yes, AutoCAD's mainly for generating that one set of drawings, whatever you're trying to create or explain or show, but it's also very useful in this type of scenario where you're trying to have your understanding of limits, of where things can collide and demonstrate different positions of something. So having really good block control lets you do that. So we'll just spend a little bit more time, let you guys play around with that a little bit more. Experiment with it, see what the different limits are available to you, and if you have any problems or understanding of how this block is still working, just let me know, or Ivan know, and we'll come over and explain a little bit better for you. Oh, another thing I should also mention, if you go to the Insert tab on the ribbon and you look at this one option here, it's called Block Editor. This will actually let you go straight into each one of these blocks and do individual edits. So after you've already created your block, you can actually go and edit that definition. So where that's helpful is, let's say I've lost all of my drawing here. It's all gone. I can still edit these pieces individually. So even though they don't exist in the drawing, I do not have to do a reference edit command. You can just go ahead and start modifying your different blocks within there. So this is definitely more helpful if you're creating your library of blocks, right, within your drawing. Because the other thing is, right now we keep thinking this is also one individual drawing. Now let's say this is a repeatable drawing package. You're making lots of different layouts with cylinders. You can also save this as a template. So if you save as, we talked about this a little bit, pretty briefly. We talked about DWGs and DXFs. There's also something called drawing templates. So you can actually build a template with a lot of this saved in the background. So let's call this the cylinder template. Let me just drop this into a document here. Closed everything down. I'm going to go and open my template. Oh, where did I save it? So you can have your template all saved and let someone else use it. So start a new drawing. I'm going to base it off this template here. There we go. And then notice, see how it says drawing to DWG? It's as if you just started a new drawing, right? If I go to save it, this is already my pre-built template with all those blocks already created in there. So again, this is about not having to recreate the wheel every time. So you've created all your nice blocks, you know that you're going to be needing them for future assemblies. You made this file once really well. You can let someone else go ahead and use that now, because you've now defined all your blocks as needed. You then saved it as a template with all of this in the background. All my templates are still there. Or sorry, all the blocks are still there after I've opened that new template. So a lot of the things we've been doing have been starting from scratch and drawing from scratch in AutoCAD. But now this is getting to that point where you've learned how to draw things for that first time. Now about learning how to reuse all that knowledge and use other people's, or you prepare something for someone else. This is sort of getting into that collaboration of what AutoCAD's meant to be for. Not just always drawing from scratch, but using what's out there. So give that a try. Maybe, you know, build up a few more blocks, save that as a template, start a new drawing, and go find that template you just created and see how everything's already built in there. So even though these commands seem, you know, fairly simple and the concept seems simple, go through the practice of actually doing this and see if you run into any problems. We were just talking about template creation. So, and the block editor. You can see that part? So the block editor, for example, if you want to close this for a second, you've made that a block, right?
Yeah, that's.
So delete the block.
Me explode it?
Let's delete it. So if you were needing to modify that block, typically you'd have to insert it and do a ref edit, right? Now if you go to the block editor right now, it will still give you all the stuff you've already created. So that cylinder you already created, you actually go right into it and say OK. Okay, usually it should let you go right into it. Like something. Okay.
地方时光
Something must be. Okay, you can watch my
是因为你这个块是
You must have created the block referencing something. So
不一样。
let's just call this.
我不知道解释讲的是什么，但是然后就在这里。
So if I were to create this as a block, let's call this cylinder body top down. Do a pick point right there. And then I say OK. So even if I've lost this block out of my drawing, if I go to the block editor, I go to modify this by selecting cylinder body top, I can go into the editor, do my edits without having to bring something in. So this is sort of more helpful. What I was alluding to was before I got into this was creating that library of blocks for your templates or for other people. You don't have to bring everything in, do ref edits. This is a purely block editing control. Now this is also a little bit newer. I'll be honest, I have not played around with it a whole lot. This is something that's coming more from their 3D world, adding constraints within the blocks. You can play around with it. I will see if we need to maybe present this more in a later class. I'm just gonna double check and see what you guys really need for your certification first. That's the key thing, right? We're trying to prepare you for that. And if this is not necessarily needed and it's more of a nice to have, we might save it for a later class where we can just sort of touch on the extras within AutoCAD. But the key thing is we want to make sure you guys are prepared for that certification. If you want to spend a little bit of time, play with these different things. Essentially, these will be things to keep it in relation to something else in your drawing, within your block. So right now, everything you have been doing in AutoCAD is loose. It's free to manipulate all the time, unless you create a block. But now what these commands allow you to do is actually create relationships between things. So yeah, I'll double check and we'll see if this is a required aspect, because I don't remember it being required. So we'll see if we need to go through that.
它会建立出来的情况下，加一个符号。
I think I know how you locked out your block editor. There's something in here that's on a locked layer, and it causes problems.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to do with this layer right here. It causes issues.
这个命令很少这个可能会有
这个命令我没听明白，他说的是什么命令？
这个命令是现在在这里你要先退出它是吗？
While you're also creating your blocks, might be a good time to also refresh yourself with layers. So if you look at your home tab on the ribbon, see this little light bulb? This actually controls whether that layer is visible or not. So let's say you want to create your block of the cylinder without the center line. So if I see it here, after selecting the center line, it tells me what that layer's what that line's layer is. So I can actually go to that, find the little light bulb, and turn it off. So that center line is now gone. So if that makes it a little bit easier for you to create your blocks, go ahead and do that as well. So again, go down on your layer drop down, find the little light bulb, you can turn it on or off. It hasn't deleted anything, all it's done is hidden it away.
直接特性匹配就好了。
没问题，没有问题。
现在我可以这样然后我点一下这个，看它的图头是连一下，对，是吧？
可是它有些不一样
是同一个图头，这是同一个图头。
都是它的颜色。
是后面是你改过了它的颜色吗？
那个。
那个就 B。现在有一个问题啊，你这个文件呢，如果你是在用 B 这个块，对不对？随便的。可以，然后呢 ，OK。随便的，可以，那么这个块是建档，对不对？那待会用 B E D I T， 这块刚才用 B 去，是吧？这个也不对，它这里日本修改，对不对？先有点线 ，close save， 然后这个块就变了。但是然后按那个 B A T
Also, as we're kind of playing around with the different blocks and things like that, we've primarily been playing with, or sorry, using AutoCAD small space relative to each other. Just as a quick refresher about the quadrant system and how we're actually using AutoCAD right now. It's going to bring up something from AutoCAD's website here. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So this is directly from AutoCAD's website. Right now we've been primarily working in the first quadrant over here. We have to remember that AutoCAD's actually made up of 4 different quadrants. We have quadrant 1, 2, actually let me just use AutoCAD itself for this one. So quadrant 1 is over here because that's positive x and positive y. Quadrant 2 is over here, whereas negative x, positive y. Quadrant 3 is negative x, negative y. And quadrant 4 is positive x, but negative y. Where this matters is if we actually need to be laying out something with absolute coordinates, the difference of how things are entered in AutoCAD, temporarily you can switch from relative, which is if I were to click here and we'll go relative 80, it will move 80 in the x direction relative to where I started. That's sort of how we've been using AutoCAD mostly up to this point. Now, for some reason though, you needed to go from, let's say, 0, 0 for now. Let's go 100 is my radius. So if I want to see if something was within this Cartesian plane, and I want to get the absolute coordinate and place something there, I could start a line, press the pound, or sorry, enter the pound key, so Shift 3, turning on the pound key, and I can enter 90, and let's say 5. This will bring me to the absolute coordinate of 90 in the x and 5 up. So again, that's different from relative coordinates, where we have been basing off something from an arbitrary point. Absolute coordinates are exactly that, the exact spot within AutoCAD 2D Cartesian planes. So again, if I want to go create a circle in this case, I want to create the spot exactly at, let's say, minus 90 and 5 up. And let's do a diameter of, or sorry, a radius of 5. So that's exactly minus 90 and 5 up. And I can continue doing this. So let's go positive 5, tab over, minus 90. This will land me in the 4th quadrant. Does that make sense, how that's different from relative? So this could be helpful if, for example, the swing of your object you're trying to locate and let's say this was a top-down view and you took measurements of your table that you're laying this out on. And let's say there was a block right here. Actually, so let's redo that. So let's say you're trying to locate this and we're doing a top-down view and you have something on your table that you've taken measurements of and you need to put down the exact location of something. This is when the absolute coordinate entry is very helpful. So let's go minus 150, tab over, minus 10. Let's go 5. Oh. Sure, let's do that. So with this allows you to locate something on your layout table in this example, and you can know the exact spots where you know that something's going to collide or where you have to ensure that your limits would be. So again, this is getting more back into that layout kind of method of using AutoCAD. But the absolute coordinates give you something to work off of in this sort of imaginary space. So instead of having everything just relative to each other, a lot of people will use this exact 0, 0 point. So again, that's pound, 0. Oh, and the other thing I should mention, you do not have to press tab. You can actually press the comma key, and that will also bring you over to your next coordinate. So moving from x and y, you can use the comma. So if I type 0, 0, the absolute coordinate, it will bring me to start from 0, 0. There's also times where if you are exporting this to a different type of software that's going to perhaps do a cutting operation on something, this is helpful when that software requires you to have everything positioned at the 0, 0 mark. This has to do typically more with CNCs, because they all base off of 0, 0. So again, more the manufacturing side for that specific example, but play with using that coordinate system and just see that how it is actually quite different from using relative polar coordinates. So again, type in a command, whether it may be line for in this case, pound, and then put your entries in. All right. And if you're ever unsure if that was actually where you thought it's supposed to start at, if you look over here, if I click on that line, it will tell you where that geometry started at, 50 minus 50. That's on the Properties tab. That's exactly what I entered for the absolute coordinate, and that's where it starts from. So play around with that a little bit. Well, actually crossing onto 7:45 here. If you guys want to take a quick 15-minute break, go ahead and do that as well.